Hello guys, welcome to a new edition of React Today as part of the World's Whale Project initiative. I would like to open with a few seconds of silence for the, as long as I know, 5 firefighters that have died, men and women. So, yes, the fires. Many things to say about the fires. These fires, as some of the people in charge, firefighters, captains, and veterans have mentioned, that 100 years of fires in one night, and it's very difficult for us, the country and the world, to understand what's going on. This program is not meant to confuse people or give misinformation whatsoever. The problem is that this has never happened ever in the history of humanity. This kind of firefight, wildfires. CTV has reported here in Canada in more than one occasion that some of those fires have been caused, whether voluntary or involuntary, by people that just are not careful enough. Other, as most of us used to believe, is because of thunderbolts or lightning that hits the trees and lights up the whole uh, forest, etc. But with the number of fires here in Canada, we're talking about just in BC more than 360 fires, and just on BC. And these fires run wild. Here in Alberta, also the same situation, hundreds of thousands of hectares. Only in Alberta, we know that there's fires all around the world. I can begin by telling you guys that there's fires in British Columbia, in Alberta, in Manitoba, in Ontario, in Newfoundland, and Labrador, in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. In the United States, there's fires in Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Maryland, Virginia. In Greece, 20 people have died, although the news have mentioned that they are considered to be migrants, which is not less important for people to die, especially if they're migrants running away from the injustices and poverty. But yes, in Greece, 20 people have been found almost together, dead, and very suspicious. And the hospitals in Greece have been evacuated in many cities. So it's bad. We have to add to that the drought conditions in summer, of course. And we're talking about more than 1 million acres burned to the ground. And the firefighters doing extraordinary efforts in order to keep Canada free of wildfires. But the problem is that, as I mentioned before, when you follow the programs and you follow how the world is pushed by different aspects, everything is coming together, like intentionally, in order to push in the world some kind of dark agenda. And it's impossible for us to continue in the world not to think about it. And we should be able to ask these questions to the fire department. What do you know in the police department? What do you know about criminal hands involved in this matter? Is this done intentionally? I think it's time for different countries that have suffered the wildfires all along to come together and make an investigation and research, detailed investigation and research on how or what is the cause of these wildfires all around the world. In Canary Islands, for example, it's been said that 5,000 hectares have burned there, and that's not good. And the problem with the people in Canary Islands, as most of the guys here in British Columbia, in Greece and everywhere there's fires, is that of course they don't want to leave their property, or they want to stand close to the properties in the roads in order to see if their houses are going to burn or their properties are going to come down in flames. Of course, if you have your property which you work for all your life, there's vineyards, there's a lot of property that is not only the homes, Of course, the houses are where the families lived and people live are the most important issue to defend and protect. But there's also vineyards, there's also property, there's also food, you name it, all kinds of products and goods that these people have cultivated in many areas here in Canada. In Canada, it's especially the bush, the forest, but they're in Canary Islands and in Tenerife. And Greece is not only property, but also vineyards, grapes, you name it, all kind of products that these people cultivate in order to survive. The Northwest Territories is something that is also affecting the First Nations up here in Canada, in the Northwest Territories. We are very concerned about how come this is so all around the world spreading, like on purpose. It's important for me to ask this question, and why is it that different countries around the world have not gathered and said, hey, this is not normal? I repeat, one here in Canada, not only one, but many of them are asking themselves, how come this is happening so quick overnight? You know, we have never had in 100 years these kind of fires. Very seldomly. There have been fires that are bigger than these, but not in 100 years. And this is not me saying, and you will see in a few minutes what experts and firefighters are saying about this matter. This is not normal. This is not just regular firefighters happening. They never have seen anything like this before. Neither have I. I remember that I used to work in Fort McMurray. Not long ago, a few years ago, Fort McMurray went up into flames too. That was probably caused by some person or people that went camping and forgot the rules of engagement when it comes to camping. Why engagement? Because there's bears, because there's many dangers that can happen unexpectedly, and that includes fires. This is something that we need to ask ourselves. What is going on here? Let's begin with this point of view.
Viral images claim to reveal what caused the Maui wildfires. Till is here to verify if those images are legit or not.
The wildfires that swept through Maui are the deadliest in U.S. history in more than a century. At least 100 people have died and more than 850 are missing. On social media, people are speculating about what could have caused the fires. One trending theory is that the fires started due to an attack from a directed energy weapon. 3 viral images appearing to show evidence of directed energy weapons have been shared online. But do these images really show that directed energy weapons started the wildfires in Maui? Let's verify. Our sources are the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the National Weather Service, a reverse image search using Revi, the Canton Repository, SpaceX, and Chilevisión Noticias, a Chilean news company. If you haven't heard of directed energy weapons, I've got you covered. They're weapons like lasers that use energy fired at the speed of light to damage or destroy targets. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, many countries, including the U.S., are researching their use. But these viral images do not show those weapons. As of August 21st, the exact cause of the Maui wildfire is still unknown, although the National Weather Service says the risk of fire was high given high winds and dry conditions on the island. So what is actually happening in these images? A lot of different things that have nothing to do with Maui. Using a reverse image search, Verify traced this picture back to a January 2018 Facebook post from the Canton Repository, a local Ohio news outlet claiming to show footage of a controlled burn at a refinery in Ohio. We traced this image back to posts from SpaceX in May of 2018. According to SpaceX, the images show a time-lapse photo of a SpaceX rocket launch in California. And finally, Verify traced this image back to a viral TikTok video from May 25th, 2023. According to the original description, the video was taken in Chile. A Chilean news outlet shared the footage saying it shows a transformer explosion. So we can verify, no. These 3 images do not show evidence that directed energy weapons started the wildfires in Maui. All 3 are older images taken from other parts of the world, and none of them show directed energy weapons. With your Verify, I'm Till.
But to me, it's very suspicious as for the fire departments that this is happening so quick. like this sergeant or captain in charge of the fires just said.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for sharing your Friday with us. Devastating wildfires continue to rip through the central Okanagan this afternoon. The cities of Kelowna and West Kelowna are now under a state of emergency after the blaze jumped the lake overnight. Now local and federal officials are providing an update on the damage and how the fight is far from over. CTV's Craig Krause reports.
An inferno erupting in the hills of Kelowna. With every passing hour, the McDougall Creek wildfire inches closer to the city, leaving thousands of homes at risk.
We had people trapped. That's the fire chief's worst nightmare.
West Kelowna crews forced to rescue team members after they were called in to evacuate residents at risk.
It was like 100 years of firefighting all at once in one night.
Yeah, you might as well get ahead of the game before, you're not allowed to come back in and then all your stuff's gone.
Growing uncertainty as the fire soared to over 6,000 hectares in size overnight. A fight Ottawa says they're ready to join.
How come this is possible? We have never seen this in 100 years. 100 years of wildfires in one night, etc. So when you see what's going on, all these fires all around the world, the only country that I was expecting not to catch fire this year was Australia, and luckily it has not burned again like 2 or 3 years ago when we saw such immense fires in Australia. It was devastating.
A mass evacuation this morning along Australia's southeastern coast, with bushfires looming and extreme danger ahead. A heat wave expected to push temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit by the weekend. Tourists, residents, everybody being told to get out. Thousands of people remain stranded on beaches, figuring the water may be their only escape.
Practically a war zone. It's just ridiculous.
Local fire brigades, mostly volunteers, are doing what they can to help keep the fires from spreading. But the threat here is unprecedented. With over 100 fires burning in New South Wales alone, barely half of them are contained. At times, firefighters battling flames over 200 feet high. One of the biggest concerns, wildlife caught in the fire's path. Images of residents saving koalas going viral. And while authorities say there's no way of telling how many animals have been killed, experts say it's likely to be in the millions.
But it's no different than what is going on here in Canada. We need to ask ourselves and ask authorities what is going on, and not only here in Canada, but in the United States and internationally, because I am one of the guys that are thinking this might be caused on purpose. As you can see, we talk about the pandemia effect. The pandemia effect is the corruption of institutions by brute capital, and how institutions, healthcare departments have been corrupted. You heard about the Sunshine List, and that keeps on going. Here in Canada, there's people that want to push again the agenda for vaccination programs, meaning there's another virus coming, of course. We don't know who created it or not, but as the FBI and the Department of Energy in the United States have found that it was made on laboratory, as they have found also in the hands of Rand Paul, Senator for the United States of America also, who has denounced Dr. Fauci and the CDC, Mrs. Walensky, and international or the National Institution of Health for receiving $400 million from Moderna. All these things only to push programs and dictatorships, because the amendments that are happening for the international health regulation are proposing in the Treaty of 1948 new amendments in which the World Health Organization will have extraordinary powers. It's already signed in Europe. And as you show in my programs, and the YouTube took down, and I'm sick of this. My programs are being so censored that it's just impossible to believe that not even then the platforms in which we relied in the past for communications are now totally untrustworthy because of their community guidelines. The same with Facebook, and this is happening more in Canada with Bill C-11 and Bill C-18. which is censorship and censorship. And we see the Prime Minister of Canada saying and blaming Facebook for not sharing the profit.
I do want to say a couple of words about the devastating wildfires in the Northwest Territories and in British Columbia. People are facing horrific situations. People are fleeing for their lives. They're worried about their communities. And Canadians from coast to coast to coast are watching in horror the images of apocalyptic devastation and fires going on in communities that so many of us know and so many of us have friends in. This is a scary and heartbreaking time for people. I got to meet with a number of evacuees on Friday in Edmonton, where they had driven down 17, 20, 25 hours to be able to find safety from Yellowknife. People were in good spirits, but scared. Worried about what's going to happen. We're continuing to monitor very closely the situation of the fires, both in Kelowna, in Northwest Territories, particularly around Yellowknife and elsewhere. There's still concerns, but people are working incredibly hard to keep these communities safe. The Canadian Armed Forces are there. Resources across the federal government have been deployed, including Fisheries and Oceans, Service Canada centres, EI, acceleration, all sorts of things that we're doing right now to make sure people are able to stay safe, able to keep their families safe as well, but also look towards the day when they're going to be able to call home and hopefully get back to their lives in safety. These are the kinds of things that we are all working on extremely closely. People have questions about whether they've lost their homes, about whether they need to evacuate, about how things are going, and that's where local news is so important. And the work that people are doing to share messages and keep people informed with safe, up-to-date information is unbelievably essential to keeping Canadians safe. That's why, and I'm going to make a comment on this, it is so inconceivable that a company like Facebook is choosing to put corporate profits ahead of ensuring that local news organizations can get up-to-date information to Canadians and reach them where Canadians spend a lot of their time, online, on social media, on Facebook. Facebook made billions of dollars in profits over the past years, including off of Canadians. And we recently passed legislation that says, Facebook, if you're going to be sharing news or work done by Canadian journalists or local news, you have to make sure they're compensated for it fairly. Well, instead of making sure that local journalists are fairly paid for keeping Canadians informed on things like wildfires, Facebook is blocking news from its sites. In a larger picture, that's bad for democracy, because democracy depends on people being able to trust high-quality journalism of all sorts of different perspectives and points of view. But right now, in an emergency situation, where up-to-date local information is more important than ever, Facebook's putting corporate profits ahead of people's safety, ahead of supporting quality local journalism. This is not the time for that. This is the time for Canadians to continue to pull together and be there for each other. It's time for us to expect more from corporations like Facebook that are making billions of dollars off of Canadians.
The profit. Speaking of profit, some of the most important polls that have been done the last 10 years is how the people here in Canada, Europe, and the United States trust the mainstream media, the legacy media. And they don't. The polls, every time they're published, convince us that the public is not in alliance with the mainstream media. Here in Canada, the CBC and other news outlets received more than $1.12 billion. That's $1.2 billion. And not only that, Canada has been proven to have a lot of help from other friends regarding communications, and that is that Canada has received reveals documents show that Bill Gates has given $319 million to media outlets. This is not me saying it or coming up with any ideas. Alan McLeod, mintpress.com. You don't see these in mainstream media. Okay. Here in Canada, we have European Journalism Center. Let's begin with Europe. European Journalism Center, $20,060,048 million. The World University Service of Canada. The World University Service of Canada, $12,127,622. Well Told Story Limited, $9,870,333. Solutions Journalism Inc., $7,254,733. Entertainment Industry Foundation, $6,688,206. New America, $3,405,859. Center for Advocacy and Research, $2 million, $200,630. The Sesame Workshop, Sesame Street, $2,030,307. Open Cities Lab, $1,601,452. Harvard University, $1,190,527. Learning Matters, $1,078,048. And I can continue. Awards directly to media outlets, to the NPR, to The Guardian, $12,951,391. Cascade Public Media, Public Radio International, The Conversation, one of my once trusted outlets of information, which has amazing articles on science before the pandemic. The Conversation, $6,664,000. Univision, which is a Mexican outlet, which immense power in Central and Latin America, has $5,924,043. Der Spiegel, of course, in Germany, Project Syndicate, Education Week, Weta, NBC, with $4,373,000. So I can go with the list here, guys, that is important for us, for the country, and for the world to understand. With this kind of realities, we need to understand that the World Economic Forum, as we saw, when Mr. Burla, the CEO of the company, was asked questions about how did you know and for how long did you know that the vaccine will not stop the spreading? How long did you know that the masks were not effective? How long did you know the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, now that Mrs. Walensky, Dr. Walensky has left, and Mr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has left, and regarding the investigations and research that all of us that care for the truth, the public enemy number one nowadays, the truth, since the AIDS pandemic that was supposed to occur only to gay people, etc. All these issues, guys, need to open our eyes, our understanding.
The CEO of Pfizer at the World Economic Forum at Davos was confronted by a journalist, and he was completely evasive in his responses.
Can I ask you, when did you know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission? How long did you know that without saying it publicly?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Answer that question. I mean, we now know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission, but why did you keep it secret? You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 80%, then 70%. But we now know that the vaccines do not stop transmission. Why did you keep that secret?
Have a nice day.
I won't have a nice day until I know the answer. Why did you keep it a secret that your vaccine did not stop transmission?
Is it time to apologise to the world, sir? To give refunds back to the countries that poured all their money into your vaccine that doesn't work, your ineffective vaccine?
Yeah, you have a little bit around.
Are you not ashamed of what you've done in the last couple of years?
Do you have any apologies to the public, sir?
Are you proud of it? You've made millions on the backs of people's entire livelihoods. How does that feel to walk the streets as a millionaire on the backs of the regular person at home in Australia, in England, in Canada?
What do you think about on your yacht, sir? What do you think about on your private jet? Are you worried about product liability? Are you worried about myocarditis?
What about the sudden deaths?
What do you have to say about young men dropping dead of heart attacks every day? Why won't you answer these basic questions?
No apology, sir. Do you think you should be charged criminally for some of the criminal behaviour you've obviously been a part of?
How much money have you personally made off the vaccine?
How many boosters do you think it'll take for you to be happy enough with your earnings? Nothing?
Who did you meet with here in secret? Will you disclose who you met with? Who did you pay commissions to? In the past, Pfizer has paid $2.3 billion.
If you saw the debate yesterday for the first Democratic debate and the 8 challengers against President Trump, you will understand also that the most powerful country in the world is caring only about what the vice president, because Mike Pence was trying to steal the show and speak more than anybody else. But he didn't get away with it. I mean, the people don't really trust him at all. And the Democratic Party doesn't represent the interests and benefits that the United States people need nowadays. None of those candidates, maybe the entrepreneur one, is the only one that shows a little better. But the fact that they didn't invite R.F. Kennedy Jr. to the debate, or Cornel West. Well, Cornel West might never win the election, but at least he's trying to open the understanding of Americans in the sense that the elections, the next presidential elections in the United States are very, very important, especially now that BRICS have invited 40 other countries that assisted to the last meeting that just finished yesterday. There's still representations there in the meeting, but the point is, we want the United States to be a different country. If there is a country that needs regime change in the positive way, democratically regime change, is the United States of America, and the Democratic Party, as shown as yesterday, is not showing any good intentions to change anything in the United States, but the benefit of the few. And the Democratic Party doesn't show any interest either to be but loyal to their career politicians, and that is against the world. And that is why BRICS is gaining, and the emerging economies are gaining so much power around the world. That doesn't mean that they're going to go to war against the United States. It's the United States that wants to go to war with everybody else if they don't obey the new world order that now they call the international rules-based order. Well, this is not going to happen. Is China an empire? China, it used to be an empire. Bernard Russell called it an empire in 1912. And if you ask me, since the days of Plato, when everybody was saying justice is what is the convenience of the strong, or the stronger, in the United States, the problem is that the United States have demonstrated for the last 100 years, and especially after the Second World War, that their only interest is this Hobbesian attitude, where the state dictates everything that the people should do, period. And after the pandemic, which was, and the mandates, and the consequences to Canadians, the masking people, the vaccination program, the fact that IGA, for example, in New Brunswick, said to ask the people to come into their market to buy food, that they were not being allowed to come in if they don't show proof of vaccination. People went crazy. What? Are you kidding me? I don't know if you remember that, but in the beginning of the pandemic, when everything with Dr. Walensky, the NIH, the CDC, and of course Dr. Fauci's directory for the World Health Organization, have been demonstrated to be absurd, and of course an experimental drug that was totally unnecessary. Maybe for people over 65, sure, but not for people or youngsters, as this document that you'll see by Kim Iverson will tell you.
You want to restore trust? Come out and tell us you're sorry. Say you're sorry to the anti-vaxxers you demonized. Say you're sorry and apologize and admit you're wrong. And say, we need to learn from this. There needs to be a reckoning. We need to go and figure out what failed. Did we allow politics to be infused way too much into our system? Yes, you did. So watch this clip.
Even if you were to get infected during post-vaccination, that you can't give it to anyone else.
Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real-world data.
Within this publication, one that demonstrates the level of severe disease, even among youth, that are preventable, that force us to redouble our motivation to get our adolescents and young adults vaccinated. Parents should encourage their children to wear masks when in public indoor settings. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, parents can protect their children by getting vaccinated themselves. This will create a protective bubble around their children who are not yet eligible for their own vaccine.
COVID-19 vaccines are now available for children under 5. With this recent authorization from FDA and recommendation from CDC, nearly 20 million children are now able to get vaccinated against COVID-19. I know many parents with very young children have been anticipating this day. We now know, based on rigorous scientific review, that the vaccines available here in the United States can be used safely and effectively in children under 5. There is a clear message that is coming through. This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, she lied throughout the entire pandemic. Her time at the CDC is unfortunately tainted with all of these lies. These will never go away. These types of videos will circulate forever. And she wants to restore trust in the CDC. Well, the way to do it is to apologize, to own up to your lies, to own up to the mistakes that you made, and to discuss why you did that, why the agency followed such political partisanship when they should have been following science, why they ignored the science that was right in front of them, even just science that was given to them by the Israelis, the Israeli scientists who were sitting in those FDA and CDC meetings. They were invited, they zoomed in, and they said, hey, by the way, this thing doesn't stop the spread. By the way, we're giving out our 4th dose now. So I don't know, it's not really, it's not doing what you think it's going to do. That's what we know. And that was all ignored.
The CEO of Pfizer at the World Economic Forum at Davos was confronted by a journalist, and he was completely evasive in his responses.
Can I ask you, when did you know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission? How long did you know that without saying it publicly?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. To that question. I mean, we now know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission, but why did you keep it secret? You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 80%, then 70%. But we now know that the vaccines do not stop transmission. Why did you keep that secret?
Have a nice day.
I won't have a nice day until I know the answer. Why did you keep it a secret that your vaccine did not stop transmission?
Is it time to apologise to the world, sir? To give refunds back to the countries that poured all their money into your vaccine that doesn't work, your ineffective vaccine?
Yeah, you have a little bit around.
Are you not ashamed of what you've done in the last couple of years?
Do you have any apologies to the public, sir?
Are you proud of it? You've made millions on the backs of people's entire livelihoods. How does that feel to walk the streets as a millionaire on the backs of the regular person at home in Australia, in England, in Canada?
What do you think about on your yacht, sir? What do you think about on your private jet? Are you worried about product liability? Are you worried about myocarditis?
What about the sudden deaths?
What do you have to say about young men dropping dead of heart attacks every day? Why won't you answer these basic questions? No apologies, sir.
Do you think you should be charged criminally for some of the criminal behaviour you've obviously been a part of?
How much money have you personally made off the vaccine?
How many boosters do you think it'll take for you to be happy enough with your earnings? Nothing?
Who did you meet with here in secret? Will you disclose who you met with? Who did you pay commissions to? In the past, Pfizer has paid $2.3 billion.
So she lied, everybody lied regarding the pandemic, and anyway, the changes in Canada against the Constitution were big. If you go to the Constitution right now, you can see that the closure of accounts is still, it's supposed to be temporary, but it's back. Canada is allowed to take your account and close it if it wants to. Now that Bill Gates, not long ago in Australia, just mentioned that a new pandemic is coming and that the World Health Organization need to have more powers and everybody has to congregate around the World Health Organization, which is 194 countries, with the exception of the State of Palestine and Vatican City, are to obey what the World Health Organization in the IHR amendments are to become, and that is dictatorial law. If you don't obey what the World Health Organization says and demands, because the World Health Organization, we have to understand here, was created to suggest the people and the countries what to do under investigation and research after comparing with its peers the conclusions, scientific conclusions, opposing opinions and verdicts and results, empiricism with any of the vaccination programs or the diseases in order to suggest, not dictate what is to be done. But since the pandemic, things have changed big time. So the point is, guys, what is going on with the fires is not separated from this intentional attitude to transform the world. This is almost terraforming the planet. It's like terraforming the planet. This is intentional. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that the BRICS, emerging economies, their plan is not to take over. China is just taking over the markets. The Silk Road Initiative, which is more than 1,000 years old, is to benefit their people. I don't trust Xi Jinping 100%, not more than Mr. Trudeau really does. But neither do I trust Vladimir Putin. It's just that they are behaving like adults, not like children. They are being people that are taking seriously us, the country and the world, and they already forgave billions of dollars in many countries in Africa in order to establish relationships, commercial and trade relationships. Do they have defects? Of course, they have defects. They don't like, for example, Russia and China don't like free expression. They don't want you to speak your mind. They want to obey government. When I say Hobbian, it's because Thomas Hobbes, in his social contract, explained that the state should be in charge of everything. Who owns land, civilian attitude, enforce the law, the rule of law, etc. In contradiction, of course, with John Locke's and Jean-Jacques Rousseau's vision of the social contract, which demanded the three powers, executive, legislative, and judicial. In this case, if the IHR amendments passed in the nations of the world, which are represented not by their peoples or their senates or their parliaments, by a delegate, one delegate that nobody sees, that nobody knows who he is, that has diplomatic immunity and lives in Geneva or has to answer to Geneva. Like I said, the World Health Organization is also an organization which is almost private, because in the sense that it has diplomatic immunity, and now with the IHR, it's going to try to impose, like it did with Europe. I showed you that document where 27 countries in Europe come together with Mr. Tedros the director of the World Health Organization, in order to sign a treaty where all Europe has abide with the World Health Organization initiatives. The point is, we have till November 27 in order to say no to the IHR amendments. It's not the treaty itself from 1948, it's the amendments, as many doctors like Dr. McCullough and Dr. Peter McCullough and Robert Malone has explained, among others, Dr. Bhattacharya, and many others that you can read in the book of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the real Anthony Fauci. And the challenge of the candidate for the presidency is prove me wrong. Prove that doctors and the testimonies and documents in my book, in my publication, among many books that he has written, that he's wrong. And we have seen with, I reiterate, with Senator Rand Paul, that this is true. They lied to us, the CDC lied to us, the NIH lied to us, all of them lied to us. But the people are not that stupid, I hope, and we are not, so we are taking action. Andrew Bridgen in the European Parliament, in the UK's Parliament, is inviting you to understand, and your representatives, that if it's not the representatives who have to make this happen, they should stop right now and say, okay, Mr. President, we don't want that to happen. We want the people of Canada, we want here in Canada, the Prime Minister, there in the United States, and the Prime Ministers around the world, according to this parliamentarian, and others in the UK's Parliament, in order to call to a referendum. There's no time because we only have till 27th of November to say no to the IHR amendments, which are above the Constitution. These suggestions, according to the language and the censorship of the language, because they say these are not suggestions, but shall be applied. For example, we need to go to Article 61, for example, and say, no, thank you, but no, thank you. We're going to apply Article 61 of the IHR, International Health Regulations, and say no to the amendments, and thank you, World Health Organization, but no thank you. But Bill Gates is saying in this conference 4 months ago, and in Australia, that the countries that not abide by the World Health Organization or the IHR are countries that are going to be the focus of the spread of the new diseases. So again, if we're going to put our hands in the hearts and minds of Bill Gates and how many millions and billions of dollars he made. For example, if you read the book of R.F. Kennedy Jr., he explains to us how Mr. Bill Gates' philanthropy invested $50 million in the mRNA vaccination program. And after he produced $500 million, that's $450 million on top of the $50 million he invested, he denied, saying that the mRNA were not as effective as we thought, and there was new developments. Of course, now they are not effective, but there's new endeavors in order to find new mRNA vaccines that will work this time. And in order to do that, we have to impose martial law, and when we have to dictate commandments and impose the law with the police, like Alan Dershowitz will love to happen, which is if you don't put your vaccination, we'll send the cops to your house and we'll make you put your vaccine. Period. That's dictatorship, dude. Especially when a vaccine takes 5 to 10 years to develop. And that's what I'm asking you guys. But as this firefighter said, pay attention.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for sharing your Friday with us. Devastating wildfires continue to rip through the central Okanagan this afternoon. The cities of Kelowna and West Kelowna are now under a state of emergency after the blaze jumped the lake overnight. Now local and federal officials are providing an update on the damage and how the fight is far from over. CTV's Craig Krause reports.
An inferno erupting in the hills of Kelowna. With every passing hour, the McDougall Creek wildfire inches closer to the city, leaving thousands of homes at risk.
We had people trapped That's the fire chief's worst nightmare.
West Kelowna crews forced to rescue team members after they were called in to evacuate residents at risk.
It was like 100 years of firefighting all at once in one night.
100 years of fires in one night. So what about these lasers and these things are happening now? Are they going to come now and say that it was the ETs now and we have to go to war to the ETs because of what they done? They caused the fires? I have been right before in many issues. For example, in the necessity of the United States Army, now that people are not volunteering to the United States armies, I mean the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, etc., the armed forces in general, they're going to have to call again for the Vietnam issued commandment, what is called drafting. If your name shows in the ballot and your name starts with M, you're going to have to do, and if you don't, to go to the armed service, and if you don't, you're going to be called a deserter. And there's many issues that we have to remember here regarding this matter, because objectors of conscience, as Mel Gibson have described in his movie Hacksaw Ridge, Muhammad Ali, for example, he had to change his religion in order to avoid the drafting. Why? Because he said, why am I going to go to fight a war in a foreign country that is 1,000 miles away, that have not attacked me, and I'm going to have to go and kill people that I don't even know? And we know what happened in Vietnam and the consequences of Vietnam and how the government never listens to the people. This is one of the other issues why the United States is not liked around the world. And I have a question for you, Professor Sachs, that I already asked you at your University of Columbia, that you haven't answered, and I would like to ask everybody else, because the question is also for president candidate for presidential elections in 2024, and that's R.F. Kennedy Jr. And that is, what is the United States going to do in case you win the presidential elections, Mr. Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., regarding Central and South America, now that BRICS is showing that just this meeting, 8 other countries have announced that they're going to come in, including Argentina, even though Argentina has a right-wing candidate for president that might win the elections. There's different interests that this program will not cover, but different interests that even far-right governments would like to adhere with BRICS. So the United States is losing the grip around the world. The Samson Plan is one of its options with Israel, which will be, for example, if we don't get it our way, we take everything down with us. So they may be Israel, which is in the center of all of this. Hecatomb will attack Iran, probably. Will the United States start a war in order to take the world down with them? If it's not ours, it's nobody else's. The Samson Plan is different in the sense that at least there was morals behind it. But the United States have not shown any morals. And the question for Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. and also for Professor Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs, will be, what will JFR Kennedy Jr. will do now that he's losing grip and the markets are tilting with BRICS, now that the war in Ukraine is losing popularity, now that billions of dollars are being sent to the Ukraine. They announced $13 billion more just today, August the 24th, 2023. And the amount of millions and billions of dollars that the United States keep on sending to a corrupt government, and we don't have any idea, or the Americans don't have any idea where the money is going to. So this is very serious issues here. Takes me back to the question to R.F. Kennedy Jr. If he becomes president, and Professor Sachs, even though it's based on the facts, it's very easy to deduce. But I would like to ask them, what would you do, as president of the United States, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., and now that America lose grip of put Russia and China together and with its imaginative foreign policy ideas for the last 40 years, especially since Margaret Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan began the idea that markets should control everything. That means American corporations. What would he do with Central and South America? Because it's the backyard, as they have called Central and South America the backyard of the United States and Canada, but especially the United States. What would they do? Are they going to, are you, RF Kennedy Jr., are you going to impose the same regime that your uncle did when he was president? That is, create another enemy within, the policy of the enemy within, and the school of the Americans, in order to divide and conquer the people, like you did like your uncle did in Guatemala, Honduras, Bolivia, like Ronald Reagan did, and Iran-Contras in Nicaragua? Or everything is valid? Remember that Mike Pompeo said, steal, kill, destroy, no matter what, the orders are to be obeyed. And the orders of the United States regarding the rest of the world for the last 100 years, especially after the Second World War, is to kill and destroy everything that opposes them. That's it. And zero accountability, zero responsibility. We don't recognize the ICC. We don't recognize the International Court of Justice. Who cares? Whatever. Now things are changing. And I will dare to say, what is it that you're going to do, RF Kennedy Jr.? Are you going to impose again the enemy within doctrine against Central and South America? Are you going to do the same that you did with Chile under Kissinger advice, which is you don't want another Japan south of the border? Referring to Mexico and, of course, Central and South America. Are you going to start killing and destroying and taking over democratic elected governments? Because Central and South America are going to resist whether you like it or not. And war is not going to be an option, maybe for you. But the people will defend their countries and their sovereignty no matter what. Of course, there's people that like to become corrupt, like American elites are corrupt, and the people that they have around the world are corrupt. But that's my question. Would you apply the same doctrine as your uncle did? I know President Kennedy was loved before, and I still do love him, in the sense of the what he did for America and everything that he did. Yes, sure, but not in this sense. Not in this sense. And I think I deserve an answer on that. And the opinion of Professor Sachs will be welcome. And many others. I would like to ask Joseph Stiglitz and, of course, Richard Wolff. I need to ask him about this too. What would you do in JFR Kennedy Jr. with Central and South America? We already seen what you have done and your influence in Chile since 1973. Now with Bolivia a few years ago, and Peru and Colombia. Another thing I wanted to mention is what Canada is going to do, because Canada have supported Ukraine. Of course, we support here in this program. I support the people of Ukraine big time. But it's not the people of Ukraine that are getting the billions. It's the companies, the corporations, and the corrupt governments, military people that are getting the money. And we see here the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Mrs. Chrystia Freeland, speaking about how, a year ago, how the opinion of the Premier here in Alberta, Madame Danielle Smith, with regret, and that it was impossible not to support Ukraine. Of course we support Ukraine, but if it's done the right way. What they're doing in Ukraine is what they have done with Central and South America. And of course, Libya, Iraq, 7 countries that General Clark mentioned those days.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
The ending is not good at all. If you have followed 2 colonels that are very important for us, the country and the world to understand and to hear, it's the last interview that Colonel Douglas MacGregor did with the fired journalist that now works, make an interview with X, now X Twitter. And what he said about the American army and how the hegemony of America is going down to the floor and is going to take Europe with it. Again, I have never seen Europe so humiliated since the Second World War, but especially Germany since the First World War. When France, after Germany lost the First World War, France took over in Germany and humiliated the Germans to the core. Well, this is way worse. The medias, you just hear me mention it before, are being bought off not only by Bill Gates, who has money to corrupt and destroy sovereignty, with the World Health Organization's initiatives that we have till November the 27th to say no here in Canada, there in the United States, the 27 countries in Europe, to the international health regulations amendments to the 1948 treaty. There's many doctors speaking about this matter that we cannot see because they're censored in one of the most and the biggest platforms, like I am being censored big time too. And I only have 57 subscribers, and I have to, in my next program, show you some issues that has to do with freedom and liberty of expression, which is one of the most important articles in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada, totally taking over. The money that the government gives to these outlets, which have been proven nobody believes in. I have told you the polls. I will show you the documents too, where the polls mention this, how nobody believes in the mainstream media, but it's bought out by government interests, in this case, the Liberal Party. I'm not very sure about the Conservative Party. I hope it does better, but I don't see anything different. I see like the Republicans and Democrats in the United States, the same thing. So we need to react today to this matter. React today, guys. We need to. Otherwise, they're going to take over us, the country and the world, and the regulations and the impositions, and the Constitution is going to serve for nothing. Your vote is going to serve for nothing. All that the unions fought for in order to have a decent life, in order to have good salaries, in order to have representation, are going to be taken over above the constitutions, because that's the purpose of the World Health Organization. It's not me saying it. It's Robert Malone saying it. It's Peter McCullough saying it. Is some of the most important cardiologists, epidemiologists, you name it, that I have mentioned in my programs, that I have to go to Rumble, because the censorship is just amazing, even though they say I have 57 subscribers. they have taken out my viewers. My viewers, they cannot even be allowed, they are not being allowed to go more than my subscribers, in order to let you think that not even my subscribers like me. This is totally anti-constitutional here in Canada, but I'm not surprised after the passing of Bill C-11 on January or February 2022, and now the Bill C-18. And of course, the censorship of Facebook, which have said to Canada that it will not allow political commentaries on Facebook or from any citizen whatsoever, whether it is political or economic. And they have copied almost the same community services and community interests and community guidelines as YouTube. In other words, censorship. Since 2014, I have said to Canadian government that we need to create a public, even private public mixed enterprise, which I already started. I'm looking for support big time from Canadian corporations that are free from the push of anti-democratic government, like is the Liberal Party nowadays, demonstrated in the pandemia, through the pandemia, and now with the corruption and issues that many outlets like The Sun in Toronto, in Ontario, is showing us, the country and the world, about the corruption in the Liberal Party. I'm very happy that we are open up our understanding in what is going on. And to add up to this gruesome reality we're living in right now these days, you all know that Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's the mercenary leader of Wagner. Wagner is a mercenary corporation that works pretty hard in order to make sure that the offensive, the special operation, as the Russians call it, the war against Ukraine, that could have been averted. No doubt, we have talked about that before with the Minsk Accords, and we have gone into detail before in other programs about it. That could have been averted by the United States, but last April and March and April 2022, there was opportunities to make peace, and the Americans and Europeans have said no, and they still insist in going to war, etc. Well, Yevgeny Prigozhin was very well known because of his mercenary force. He took prisoners out of prison and said, okay, you fight for us, you're gonna be acquitted of all charges if you fight for Russia, Mother Russia, and fight for Wagner Corporation, and they did. Wagner has a lot of experience in combat, and they have presence in Russia, and but principally fighting for Russia in Africa, places in Africa, Mali, among others, and of course, the war in Ukraine. He was assassinated after 2 months ago. He decided to go against President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So he was literally killed. That's what we and everybody knows about his destination. His final destination has been the assassination of him and some other of the cadre that was with him, that have big responsibilities and leadership in the company. Also acquiring property rights on Syria's oil companies after the taking over by the United States and proxy terrorists in Syria. He was turned down and killed yesterday, a couple days ago, on a supposed trip from Mali to Moscow. So yeah, it was totally expected. I mean, he committed treason. Russia is at war, and the penalty for treason is death, hanging or against the wall. But yeah, okay, we know that Russia doesn't take these things lightly, neither does the United States. But the United States is a different issue here. For example, the United States is treating with England and Julian Assange as a criminal of war, and he's not, because he exposed people and put in and endangered the lives of many people. That's also lies, but that's another issue that we have talked about before also. And free Julian Assange immediately. That will be the right thing to do, Mr. Joe Biden. if you want to show that America still has what we are supposed to believe in, that is values, American values when it comes to democracy and free speech and without censorship, which is all a lie. So yeah, that was expected. And the other part, as we have talked many times over the years, in Spanish and English, it was the release of the atomic contaminated water from the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi reactors in Japan. Yeah, as we speak, for 17 days, they're going to be releasing tons of water to the ocean, to the Pacific Ocean. Because they don't know what to do with that radioactive material, even though that material has been degraded in order to be approved by the World Health Organization standards and reduce the tritium components of the radioactive material in the water to 1,500 background per liter, which is supposed to be, according to the World Health Organization standards, acceptable to be not consumed by humans, but according to the World Health Organization, and of course the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, that many journalists have put on the spot because the accusations against Russia with the nuclear plant that is in Ukraine, accusing Russia that Russia was responsible for the attacks against the plant, which we already know and has been proven by media that it was also Ukraine who wanted, and it was interest to blame Russia about it. The point is, Fukushima Daiichi is expelling a lot of tons of water into the Pacific for the next 17 days, and this has caused a lot of reactions from North Korea and other countries that are accusing Japan of irresponsibility. Why didn't these people still insist on creating atomic energy? Is something that we're going to dedicate the next program on, and it's about energy. We're going to speak about energy.
China has retaliated against Japan as it had promised to do, slapping a blanket ban on Japanese seafood imports. It fears contamination from treated radioactive water, which Tokyo began releasing today from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant. Last-ditch appeals by activists and by the Chinese government failed to halt the discharge, which was given the all-clear by the International Atomic Energy Agency.
日方强行启动核污染水排海，公然向全世界转嫁核污染风险，这是极端自私、极不负责任的错误行为。所有的利益攸关方都有权利、有责任采取必要的防范措施，维护海洋环境安全，维护食品安全和公众健康。
Chinese customs suspended imports from Japan of all aquatic products. China was the biggest buyer of Japanese seafood last year, importing about $600 million worth of produce. And Chinese territories Hong Kong and Macau also announced bans covering Japanese seafood imports from 10 regions. Meanwhile, protests as well in South Korea. Police arrested at least 14 people who stormed a building housing the Japanese embassy in Seoul. South Korea is maintaining import bans on Fukushima fisheries and food products until public concerns are eased. North Korea also denouncing the water release, demanding that Japan immediately call off the discharge. Pyongyang described the move as, quote, unforgivable, as a unforgivable crime against humanity for which Tokyo will be held accountable. Japan's plan also facing criticism at home. There were demonstrations in a town near the plant, while protesters were also seen outside the headquarters of TEPCO. Now, that is the power company that runs the Fukushima plant. Local fishing groups continue to voice their opposition on concerns about damage to the reputation of their seafood.
The wastewater discharge at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant began at around 1 p.m. local time.
今回の放出に関しましては、先ほどのご質問にあった通り、24時間連続で、放出する予定でございます。機器の故障、あるいは何かトラブルがございましたら、一旦立ち止まるという姿勢のもと、中断するということになります。
Authorities say what goes out to sea has been diluted so that the level of tritium, the radioactive material which cannot be removed through the processing system at the plant, will be capped at well below 1,500 becquerel per liter. And that has been confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which now has a presence in Fukushima. That would mean wastewater that's been discharged would have met much stricter safety standards than those set by the World Health Organization. To dispel any fear of possible impact on marine life and the environment, TEPCO said it will take samples of seawater near the plant every day.
So yes, but if the World Health Organization says it's all good, we have to trust it, like with the pandemic and now with international health regulations. We have to expand on that theme as soon as we can, because we only have till November 27th here in Canada to make a stop to that and say thank you, but no thank you. Even if we are accused by Bill Gates and the World Health Organizations to be one of the focus centers of the new pandemic that they're going to release, pretty sure, on purpose, and a new investigation is going to come in, and we're going to have to wait 75 years, like with the UFO phenomena, in order to find 75 years later that all those redacted papers were deceiving on purpose, and in order to begin from zero an investigation like we're doing with the UFOs and UAPs. We should be asking the UAPs what is the influence of the extraterrestrials and the civilizations that are amongst us already. What is the influence even in politics and economy? Everything we need to be asking that question. If I was interviewed, I will say a lot of stuff about it. But regarding the Fukushima Daiichi, well, the water is going to be there, corrupting the oceans, and people are saying, okay, we're not going to eat any Japanese food anymore, and they are expected to, of course, diminish the consumption of Japanese food 40 to 50%, etc. But when it comes to the Fukushima Daiichi release of this atomic energy, corrupted waters, contaminated waters, is biblical. And like they're saying, it's apocalyptical. The Prime Minister says about the fires here in Canada that it's apocalyptical. Of course it's apocalyptical because it's done on purpose. I'm pretty sure about that. You might call me crazy and misinforming. Let's find out. You already saw the videos and the testimonies of the firefighters here in Canada that says 100 years of fires in one night. That's impossible to believe, dude. Something is going on. But not only that, we have to go back to the book of Revelations and go to the good book and said what they think about it. And because of the release of the Fukushima Daiichi, it's accomplishing the prophecy. But in the book of Revelations, you can read, and I said, Revelations 8:11, a third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. And that is according to the NIV. But let's take a look to another version when it says, I would rather go to the KJV, if it's possible to find it. The King James Version. The King James Version species like this. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Just a point for you to consider here in this program today. What is your opinion? Make your comments. Please subscribe to this channel and give it a like and share. This is important information that is being censored, big time censored. My channel is being censored on ways that I cannot imagine. This morning I wake up with 38 views. I know that I already surpassed the hundreds, but they reduced it to 38, and when I refresh it, it came down to 25. So, etc. So yes, guys, let's sum up. We need to consider that the fires are not done by nature. Nature and the lighting of a storm is not producing these devastating fires, wildfires. I think this is done on purpose, the same as the pandemic, and the same of the World Economic Forum have pushed for this. They are in the offensive. They are in the offensive, and they're using technology and any means necessary to submit the world into submission. Like Alan Dershowitz would love to do. If it's necessary, put your knee on everybody's neck, like George Floyd style, and get vaccinated and obey or else, like Israel is doing with Palestine here. And Europe is doing with its own people, when the foreign ministry said a couple of years ago that it doesn't matter, they're going to support Ukraine. Ukraine war is going to happen regardless of what the German people say. And the same with the amendments and the mandatory amendments to the COVID-19 vaccination program, which was mandatory. The same in Australia, which if you watch this clip, you will understand why. Apparently Australia is an easy lay for the Americans, so is the United Kingdom.
Good morning to you. Given the hour, I'll press on quickly, Excellency. There was two things I wanted to ask you, although one additional PS. Let me deal with the first one. Australia, how did it become such a slavish servant of the United States government, thousands and thousands of miles away, that it is prepared to risk war with its major trading partner and relatively near neighbor, China? How did that happen? When did it happen?
George, many books will be written about this. It's partly history and it's partly bad luck. The history is that since World War II, Australia has been dazzled by American power and American glamour. An American official who's unnamed said Australia's an easy lay. And I think that's a 5-word answer to your question. We're an easy lay, as Americans see us.
Well,
we want to be like
them. It's a depressing enough answer. It was bad enough when you were an easy lay for us in Blighty, but to be an easy lay for Joe Biden is a recipe for dissatisfaction, if ever I heard one. But the slavishness is so against your own interest. I mean, if I was China, I'll tell you frankly, if I was the leader of China, I wouldn't buy another thing that is grown in or made by an Australian hand. I'd actually say, go to hell, Australia. Instead, they buy huge amounts of your exports.
This is all true, but we have been deeply penetrated politically, economically, culturally, psychologically by America over the last 20 or 30 years. We had a brief window of independence, of sovereignty, from the time Gough Whitlam came to power to the time Paul Keating lost power to John Howard. In those 20 years, we were actually finding our home in Asia and establishing an identity for ourselves, a very attractive multicultural identity. But now we have timorously and timidly gone back into the American lager. And we don't need regime change in Australia. We're already deeply penetrated. And I have to emphasise this. I think much is the same is true of England, I would dare to say, and also of Germany. So we have all gone back to lackey status, to this strange globalist imperialist regime in Washington that doesn't seem to care that America is falling apart around it. They're in their gated suburbs. They live very well, this little 1%. They want to rule the world, and Australia is just coming along, wagging its tail and saying, please pat me on the head. What do you want me to do next? And that's where we are, unfortunately.
So Canada, we have to react today to this matter. We have to react today and be smart. Regarding the UFO issues, I suggest you to watch my program. And watch my programs also on Rumble, under Oneness versus the One. This is too much to talk about, too much proof to tell you guys. And come on, let's come together. And I'm already calling my Jesus and the Maranatha. I want him to come back and show these corrupt people what he thinks of them. He already said it. when he said, "Woe to you." For us, for the country, for the world, hope to see you next time in the next edition of React Today as part of the World's Way Out Project initiative. Au revoir. Bye-bye. Hasta pronto.
Thank you.